So tonight we're going to ask the question, will Africa shape the future of the world? Stay with us as we have that discussion. Hello, everybody. I am Attorney Augustus Corbett, aka the Minister of Justice, and with me I have,
Attorney Chloe Corbett, aka the Duchess of Justice.
and together we are the Defiant Lawyers. Each and every week, sometimes twice, three times a week, we bring you a legal analysis of trending politics, policies, personalities, and pop culture to empower you with the information you need to defy an unjust legal system. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Also, share, like, comment, engage with us, especially on this very, very important topic. Will Africa or how Africa will shape the future? First of all, let me apologize. We had technical issues just before we got ready to go live, and we still haven't really fixed them, but I found a workaround because Chloe and I really want to have this discussion today. So if we go out, I apologize. It's something that I may have to get some help with from some professionals, but hopefully everything will be okay. Meanwhile, Chloe, how are you doing?
I'm doing just fine, Dad. How are you?
I am doing so well. I'm very, very, very excited about this topic. This is a topic that is dear to my heart and has been for, what, 4 decades, for literally 4 decades. So I am very excited about what seems to be going on the continent of Africa, particularly Sub-Sahara Africa. And we thought that we need to have, sort of a light conversation this time because there are going to be multiple conversations we're going to have about the continent of Africa and how it's going to shape the world future. But tonight we just want to sort of give an introduction. So, Chloe, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so there is a lot that's happening in Africa, and there's a lot that is related back to here in America as well, us as Black folk. We always hear in the news, if you watch the news or go on social media, about a lot of the strife that's going on, the conflict, what the Chinese government is doing and other powers as well. And we'll get into that into later videos. But I think we wanted to start it off with just kind of our perception of Africa, how we feel about it, the continent, and why we wanted to make this video. So for me, I've always had a very diverse group of friends. I grew up with all different types of cultures, people from all walks of life, and I also had a lot of African friends as well, specifically West African friends, even more specifically, mostly Nigerian and Ghanaian. Uh, um, just throughout high school and college, those were a lot of the Africans that I hung out with. And a lot of them were Americanized, meaning they were born here, but their parents were from a country in Africa. But I was still able to get a firsthand look and experience just the cultures that they brought, the mindset that they brought. And we would have honest discussions about it and sometimes even clashes about our perception of America, me as a African American descendant of an enslaved person, and them as being from the continent without that history. So I think we'll get into that, Dad. But I've always just been exposed to different African cultures and countries through my friends and friendships.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I didn't grow up with a diverse group of friends like that. I was raised in a very small rural town in North Carolina. You basically had whites and blacks, some Native Americans, and then in the mid 80s, you had a lot of Latinos moving in into the area. Um, but my diversity of community dramatically increased in the 80s. There, I met all kinds of people from everywhere, literally, and many of them were Africans. My undergrad major was chemistry, and a lot of Africans would major in the sciences, engineering, chemistry. And so I had a lot of friends and classmates from Africa. And Chloe, it was really at ENT that I really I became a Pan Africanist. Okay, and I mean I am today 4 decades as a Pan Africanist, and I mean I am really a devoted, committed Pan Africanist. So I think a good place to start is when your mother texts me. So I just want to make sure everything is good. I think a good place to start is by starting with a definition of Pan Africanism. Exactly what is Pan Africanism? When I say I'm a Pan Africanist and a very devoted, committed Pan Africanist, here is what I mean. Let me put this definition on the screen. All right, so Pan Africanism is the belief that people of African descent have common interests and should be unified. Let me stop there. So, first, there is the belief that African people, native, indigenous African people, as well as members of the African diaspora, should be united. We are all of African descent. Um, we share a common lineage, and of course, I know I've been to the continent of Africa. I know that there's a lot of diversity, even within the continent of Africa. There are a lot of different tribes. There are a lot of different languages, a lot of different dialects, etc. Um, but we're still black people. We're still black people, and we're still descendants of Africa. And unfortunately, one of the things that the enslaver did to African Americans and also did as colonizers on the continent of Africa was he taught us to hate our blackness, our African heritage. He taught us that Africans, indigenous Africans, are, from the jungle and are unsophisticated, uncivilized. And sadly, some African Americans still hold on to that misinformation, that propaganda, even today. Um, and vice versa. And I want you to talk about this a little bit, Chloe. And vice versa, it seems like there are a lot of Africans who come to America with preconceived notions of African Americans. So while the enslaver was uh, sort of propagandizing, brainwashing us here about Africa, he was doing the same thing to indigenous Africans about African Americans. And so, unfortunately, there seems to be a divide and a gulf between African Americans and Africans who come here. That's not always true, but it seems to be true in far too many situations. But it was in college that I committed myself to becoming a Pan Africanist. So if we go back to the definition here, Pan Africanism is the belief that people of African descent have common interests and should be united. Historically, Pan Africanism has often taken the shape of a political or cultural movement. There are many varieties of Pan Africanism. In its narrowest interpretation, Pan Africanists envision a unified African nation where all people of the African diaspora can live. In more general terms, Pan Africanism is the sentiment that people of African descent have a great deal in common, and a fact that deserves notice and even celebration. Um, I, I like the definition. Um, and I'll give it back to you. Let me just say that as a Pan Africanist, I believe that black people, no matter where we are, will never be respected and can never reach our fullest potential until the continent of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, where most of the black folks live, is unified, independent, and prospering. That's when we here in America will get our respect. Chinese people in America get respect because America respects China. Japanese people here get respect because Japan is respected. British people get respect here because Britain is respected. You go down the line. African American people here are not respected because Africa is not respected. It's not unified, it's not independent, and it is not prospering the way it should. And of course, we know colonialism ended. Most of those countries gained their independence in the 60s, but a new form of colonialism set in. And unfortunately, Africa is still not um, prospering the way it should. But it seems like I'm hearing a roaring. It seems like I'm hearing a sound coming from the continent. And it's interesting. And before I give it back to you, Chloe, let me just play this video of this South African leader, Julius Malema, and he is doing a chant. It's a controversial chant. Elon Musk, a white who grew up in South Africa, says that it's a chant that promotes genocide of white people who live in South Africa. You know, but the chant is I got to play it. I want us to hear the chant. Okay, hold on.
This is your summer to smile with Aspen Dental's Summer of Smiles event, celebrating 25 years of affordable care with epic savings. Right now, new patients without insurance get a free full exam and x-rays, plus 20% off all treatment plans. Book today.
You when I'm sit.
There it is.
Where were you when I'm dream? So fast, Kichi. Hey boy, so fast, Kichi. Hey daddy, Kichi, Kichi, Kichima. Kichi, Kichi, Kichima. Sibram Konto, Alaye. Sibram Konto, Alaye. Shoot to kill, Kilawa. Shoot to kill, Yamaza. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa. Brr, pa, pa. Attention.
Very interesting. They are saying, I can make out some of the words, killed the Boer, who is the white South African, killed the farmer, who is typically the white South African who was able to retain much of the land and wealth of South Africa even after apartheid ended. So there is a growing desire of the black South Africans to regain that wealth, that land. And so that song sort of embodies that frustration that black South Africans have with the white minority still owning most of the land and the wealth in that country. Real quickly, I at ANT worked to divest South Africa back in the early 90s. We at ANT In fact, Jonathan Jackson, Jesse Jackson Jr., and I went to college together. And Jesse Jackson Sr., Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., is an alum of A&T, and we did marches to divest South Africa, which eventually led to the abolishment of apartheid. So that's how far I go back, and that's how deep I go into the Pan Africanist movement. All right.
So I have a lot of thoughts about this topic. First, I want to start with a couple observations and then give my personal thoughts. From what I can tell, the Pan African movement started, after the civil rights movement of the 60s, and then you go into the 70s, where Black people, we were looking to embrace even more our African heritage and connect with our Africanness, by wearing the dashikis, by embracing our natural hair, all of that, which I love, which I completely agree with, and think that we do need to continue to be connected to our Africanness and really working to to ensure that the continent of Africa succeeds. Because I do agree that our perceptions as African Americans is tied to what is happening on the motherland and the continent. What I've observed being a millennial and, you know, a, a middle millennial, from other millennials as well as Gen Zers is, and this is just from social media, this is anecdotal. I don't have any numbers about this, but I do feel like there is less of a connection with Africa with people my age and younger, who are African American, and maybe not as much focus as being Pan Africanist and the continent succeeding, etc. I was watching a video a while back on this popular channel on YouTube, and it was a group of Africans, African Americans. They were answering questions and having a dialogue. And they asked this one participant, "How do you feel about the term of African American?" And he said, and this is very much paraphrased, but he said in a nutshell, he's okay with the term African American, but he believes that it does denote that, you know, us as Black people, we are either first or second generation Americans versus a lot of us who've been here from the foundation of this country, who had ancestors who were enslaved and built this country, and who have been here than a longer of the of white Americans who have been in this country as well. So what I got from that is his point is he wanted to make sure that yes, we are we are connected to Africa and the motherland, but also the contributions that our people have made to this country and literally having built it up as well. And when I saw that, I was like, I never actually thought about that. I think that that's a good point. We're wanting to make sure that we are connected to our Africanness and connected to the continent of Africa, but also ensuring that people in this country know and that other Africans know and immigrants know that if it were not for enslaved African Americans and then the civil rights leaders and other members of our community, a lot of the rights and protections that they're afforded by coming here would not be afforded to them without us being here and kind of building this country up from its fabric as well. And I've had a lot of these different types of conversations with my African friends about this. I remember in college, freshman year, I had an African friend. Um, she wasn't from Ghana or Nigeria. I can't remember what country it was, but we started having a conversation about this, and she said, "Well, in a nutshell, my family chose to come here, and your ancestors were brought here in chains." And that really riled me up because if it were not for my ancestors who were brought here in chains, you would not be able to sit here in this class and study and get the education that you're getting now. So I think there's a lot of that back and forth that's going on, and especially a lot of conversations that millennials and Gen Zers are having as well. One final observation is I was listening to this British African woman talk, young lady. She came over to America and she said what she notices that Black people teach her that being Black is a struggle. and she just wants to be seen as a person. So, she came in with this different mindset, not having the historical and systemic racism that African Americans had, African descendants of slaves have had. And basically how I perceived it is she was saying, you all just want to just play struggle politics. So I say all of that to say I think that we need to be invested in Africa. We need to make sure that Africa is strong, that the countries in Africa are strong. We need to be connected to our roots. I plan on going to Nigeria and Ghana next year, so I am all for that. But at the same time, I want to make sure it's clear too that if it were not for us as African Americans, this country would not be the way it was. We would not have the economic status that we have. We would not be the superpower that we are, and that needs to be respected as well. So I don't know if that took us on a tangent, that, but I have seen a lot of these type of conversations having with people my age in terms of how we view ourselves and our connection to Africa too.
No, thank you very much for your comments. And I think it's the very type of comment that conversation that we want to have this first show that we're doing on Africa. So I'm going to go back and respond to all that you just said, because as I heard you say all of that, something riled up in me, quite frankly. Um, and I don't know if it's generational. I don't know if it is ideological. I, I I don't know, but and I'll admit I'm different. I'm different than most African Americans. I am truly a Pan Africanist. Um, I consider myself to be African, more African than I am American. Although I never lived on the continent, I have visited. But in my heart, I'm more committed to my African ancestry than I am to America. I'm an American citizen, have been born and raised here. Family's been here 3 or 4 generations. Um, but I, in my heart, am really connected to the African part of African American. Um, so much so that I did my family research. And let me quickly tell you how that came about. The reason why I went on the journey of discovering who I am ancestrally. And by that, I don't mean I'm in the ancestral worship and all that. I don't do any of that. But I did want to know what where my family came from. So I don't know if you're familiar with these things, these rings, Chloe, called crest rings.
Mm-hmm.
So a crest ring, for those who don't know, a crest ring is a ring, a gold ring, and it has like a crest, an emblem on the top of it. And I saw this white guy wearing one day, and I wanted one. It looked really nice, very sophisticated looking. I didn't know what the symbol meant, but I liked the ring. So I went to the jeweler and told him I want to get a crest ring. And he said, okay. He looked at me kind of funny and he said, okay, I'm happy to do that. The cost is about $1,000, if I remember correctly. He said, but can I ask you a question? Sure, I said. What? He asked me, what is your last name? I said, Corbett. And he went into his, inventory, and he pulled out some stuff about the Corbett last name. And he told me, he said, it's an Irish name. It's from Ireland. And here's what it means. And again, I'm happy to do this for you, but may I ask you a personal question? I said, certainly. He says, are you Irish? I said, of course not. I am an African American. He said, well, this emblem celebrates the Corbett Irish ancestry. So, and before he could get it out, I caught on to what he was saying. And I said, you know what? Thank you so much for asking me these questions. And no, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to spend money to purchase a ring that carries the name of the enslaver. I'm not going to do that at all. Absolutely not. Thank you for asking me those questions. And he said, sure, no problem. And I then went to the genealogical office in North Carolina and begin discovering who I am, my ancestry, my maternal ancestry. And I was able to go back to my great great maternal grandfather, Thomas Williams, was an enslaved man. And that wasn't enough. I couldn't go back any further than him because they didn't keep the enslaved people's names and records and all of that. But I did get back as far as I could. It was about 1830. Um, that led to me taking a DNA test. So I took a DNA test many years later and discovered that I am my maternal great great grandparents were from Nigeria primarily. Nigeria and some Cameroon descendancy, but primarily Nigeria. And then I was able to delve deeper and found out that our family is from the Yoruba tribe. Okay, and I'm in the process, my wife and I, of changing our names because I'm not going to, and she's in agreement with me. I don't plan to die with the enslaver's name. I'm not taking that name to the grave. That name gives me no pride. Corbett, that I don't know anything about that. I just know that when our ancestors were enslaved, they took on the names of the enslaver. To me, it's like having it's like being branded. It's like a cow that got branded. You know, I just refuse. I do not plan to die with that name. Um, Now, you said that your generation, you don't know how strong of a feeling it is. It's, anecdotal. I suspect you're probably right about this, though. Don't have as deeper connection, don't feel as deeper connection to Africa as some of us who maybe grew up in the 70s and yes, went through all the dashiki and said loud and black and I'm proud and experienced Jim Crow and all of that. You all didn't experience that, Chloe. I mean, your generation has lived with a black president twice elected, and a um, and a black female vice president. I mean, I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. So my connect my it I so you were saying we should yeah have a connection to Africa and maybe visit the continent and so forth, but at the same time, we're really Americans, and we need to never forget that and make sure that folks know the contributions that we have made here in America. I take a different approach. My belief is, let me put it this way. We've been here 400 years and we still have about 2% of this nation's wealth. We are really not owners of much of anything in America. And from the looks of things, America will forever treat us like second-class citizens. So after being involved in that struggle for 60-something years, uh, you know, I'm in my heart. In my heart, I'm just more connected to my African heritage, right? I don't think we should just know about our connection to Africa. I don't think we should just, like, okay, yeah, we're connected to Africa, but it's I think we need to go much deeper than that. I think we need to champion Africa. I think we need to love Africa. I think we need to support Africa. I think we need to be involved in the total liberation, unification, and independence of Africa. Because again, until Africa is respected, is prospering, is powerful, blacks around the world will never be respected. And right now, blacks around the world are not respected. We're not respected in Europe. We're not respected in America. We're not respected in the Middle East. We're not respected in Arab nations. We're not respected in Asian nations. We're not respected in Latino nations. We aren't respected anywhere. And that is largely because of the continent of Africa not being respected the way it should be.
Yeah, I agree. I love what you said about how, as African Americans, we need to also champion for African issues as well, and for the success of African nations and African countries. Because just like you said, the fact of the matter is, if Africa were viewed more favorably by the world powers and by other countries, um, by other countries in the world, then we would be viewed that way as well. Love or hate the Chinese Communist Party, at the same time you have to respect them because they're powerful. And that power goes on Chinese Americans and Chinese people as well. There's a certain that they have regardless.
Well,
So
so let me just
yeah.
say, yeah, let me just say, let me bring that home a little bit more.
Hmm.
So you shoot a black man, the police shoot a black man to death in the streets. Unarmed, innocent black man, shoot him to death. Spit on his corpse. White police officer. Let's just say. There isn't a whole lot of outrage about that. Okay? There's not. Some people will celebrate it. Do that to a Chinese person. Do that to a Jewish person. Do that to an Englishman. Do that to a Canadian. Do that to a Japanese. And it's going to be different. And a part of the reason it's going to be different is because the United States government knows that it has to answer to Canada, to China, to Japan, to France, to England, wherever those people come from. The U.S. government knows they've got to have a conversation about the way that Chinese American person was treated by the police officer. There's not that second thought with us because the U.S. government is not trying to respect the continent of Africa. But let me tell you this, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation. I believe that's changing. And here's why I believe it's changing. And I'm gonna go right back to you so you can finish your thought. I apologize. I just want to get that in. I'll forget things if I don't say it. Okay, let me just pull this up. Africa is rich in natural resources ranging from arable land, water, oil, natural gas, minerals, forests, and wildlife. The continent holds a huge proportion of the world's natural resources, both renewables and non renewables. Africa is home to some 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 8% of the world's natural gas, 12% of the world's oil reserves. The continent has 40% of the world's gold and up to 90% of its chromium and platinum. The largest reserves of cobalt, diamonds, platinum, and uranium in the world are in Africa. It holds 65% of the world's arable land and 10% of the planet's internal renewable freshwater source. In most African countries, natural capital accounts for between 30% to 50% of total wealth. Over 70% of people living in sub-Saharan Africa, the black part, Africa, depend on forests and woodlands for their livelihoods. Land is an economic development asset as well as a socio-cultural resource. A significant share of these resources is, however, used unsustainably, while others are lost through illegal activities, meaning that the stream of benefits generated from these resources is being reduced over time. For instance, Africa loses an estimated $195 billion annually of its natural capital through illicit financial flows, illegal mining, illegal logging, the illegal trade in wildlife, unregulated fishing, and environmental degradation. So, what I'm saying is the continent of Africa and the countries of Africa should be the most respected on the planet, given all the wealth, the resources that we have. But we know what's going on. White supremacy has been present on that continent, robbing those people, our people, of those natural resources. The countries that have the greatest reserves of diamonds and cobalt and uranium have the poorest people. And where's the money going? Where are those resources going? Here, America, and Europe. And now China is in there trying to get what they can get, and Russia's in there getting what they can get. Arab nations are in there getting what they can get. Okay? When, again, the African people should be the most wealthiest and respected people, given all the natural resources that we have. And we, as members of the African diaspora, should be valued too in folks' eyes. But because Africa has not yet unified, become independent, and are prospering from what's in their soil, both the African countries, the African people, the African diaspora, we get no respect. So, I don't know that we'll ever get the kind of respect that we deserve here in America. But we would if our motherland was. All right, now, sorry for interrupting you.
Everything you said, I completely agree with. I mean, we know that it goes to white supremacy and what colonialism did to Africa is a microcosm of what's going on here when we were brought in chains and enslaved. I think one of the big issues too is the fact that the Europeans cut up Africa and put different cultures together, communities together, ethnicities together, and that has caused a lot of internal conflict and warring as well. But no one wants to talk about that. You know how they just cut up different different landlines and boundaries. With cultures that for a long time had conflict, and then oh, that's just because they're African, because they're black, because they're prone to violence, etc., without taking any part about what colonialism and white supremacy did as well. And I do think too, as African Americans, we need to champion that's sticking out in my mind, champion Africa and champion African countries because our success is linked to them and their success is linked to us as well. The only point I was making before is just have the acknowledgement too that there's a lot of Africans or just immigrants coming over to to chase the American dream and to take part of this American dream, don't just look at us as saying, "Oh, they just want to talk about struggle and race all the time." If we didn't talk about the struggles and racism, then immigrants of color who come over here would not be able to benefit and take part in the American dream as well. That's the only point that I wanted to bring out. But
And
in
but
terms of
let me
supporting Africa, championing Africa, I am 200% there.
well let me say with those Africans who look at us as always in the struggle mode. Let me address that too. And I had intended to anyway. I think Africans who have that attitude are ignorant. Okay, and how can they say we're always in a struggle attitude when white supremacy has dominated the entire continent of Africa, especially the sub-Saharan countries? In other words, she, as an African person, should be in struggle mode too to get those African countries completely liberated from neo-colonialism. So to say basically what she's saying is we have stopped fighting. You know, you African Americans continue to fight. We have stopped the fighting and we get along well with our European counterparts. Yeah, and they're robbing you blind. They are stealing from you like crazy. Imperialism, that's what Julius Malema was singing about. That's the frustration in Africa. The young generation over there know that they ought to be much more wealthier than they are with all of those resources, but they know the imperialists and others have been robbing them, the colonialists. And so when she talks about being an African British person, that the African American is always in this struggle mode, well, yeah, because the fight continues. The fight is very much, again, we only have 1 or 2% of this nation's wealth. There are all kinds of disparities everywhere. There's systemic racism everywhere, structural racism everywhere. And it's true still today in Africa. And by the way, if you go to Britain, you will find that African people are on the bottom there too. And in France and Spain, right? Portugal, right? Go throughout the European continent, and where will you find black folks? On the bottom. So why are they not struggling for full equality?
Yeah. So that's why we have to recognize the root of the separation, which is colonialism, white supremacy, neo-colonialism, because a house divided cannot stand. In the words of the Bible and Abraham Lincoln, I think that was a famous quote of his, but he got it from the Bible. Um, so that's why I'm looking forward to this series that we're talking about too, because we're talking about, okay, what about the future? How is Africa now rising up, and what are some of the things that the powers that be are trying to do to keep it from rising up as well? We're gonna get
Yep.
into that, yeah, over these next few videos too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes Africans, I had a guy to say the same thing you were told. Write that, write a comment like that on our YouTube channel, on the Defiant Lawyers YouTube channel, saying that we're just, he was from Nigeria, and he said that we Nigerians, we come to America and we do better than you African American people who've been here 3, 4 generations. Well, needless to say, I took his head off, um, because I don't let, I try to educate my African brothers who have that sort of that ignorant attitude about African Americans, as I try to educate African Americans who have an ignorant attitude about Africa.
yeah, I was about to
Because,
say that too.
yeah, I mean, how can we ever be unified if both of us are looking at each other that way?
Yeah.
Um, and and the guy with the Nigerian guy, I replied to him. I said, well, first and foremost, um, Nigeria was conquered by British people. As a matter of fact, the name Nigeria was given to you by British people. That was not the original name of that region of Africa. I think it was the Empire Benin, I believe. Um, they colonialized you there, and still to this day, neo-colonialism is still a huge part of Nigeria. If Nigeria was prospering the way that it should, he wouldn't have to come to America. He could stay there and do well. Why are you here? You're here because you're coming here for opportunities. And as you said, Chloe, you're able to take advantage of some of these opportunities because of the work African Americans have done that you now benefit from. You know, when we back at A&T would be dealing with snobbish uh, Africans, you know, we would tell them you're at this black HBCU land grant university that was built because of the work of African American people. You're benefiting literally from our work, our sacrifice, our blood, sweat, and tears. Okay? A lot of the advantages that you take, that you get when you come over here, like you said, Chloe, come or came from the work, the contributions, the sacrifice, sometimes even the death of African American people. So get off your high horse. I remember back in the 60s, I don't remember, but I read about it. Um, Malcolm X had to humble some of the African leaders who had sort of a bourgeois attitude toward African Americans. And he explained to them that, you know, yeah, you think you're in a good position with these European people, but they're robbing you blind. And some of you are corrupt leaders, and you are actually participating in the robbery of your country. So don't have a snobbish attitude with us. And you said something about carving up the continent. Let me show that that was not that is absolutely right. Okay, it's called the Conference of Berlin, 1884 through 1885, also known as the Congo Congress or West Africa Congress. And basically, what the European countries did was they met and they literally carved Africa up and like a pie, like a pizza. And the British said, okay, we're going to take this part. France, you can have that part. Portugal, you can have that part. I mean, literally divided the continent up to get to those resources. And thus colonialism began. So that literally happened.
Yes. Yes. Yep. And it's because the nations, the people in Africa were so strong, and it's been said one of the richest people in the world, besides Solomon, was Mansa Musa, who was an African kingdom and leader some centuries ago. And so, just like the statistics you read, just about the natural resources that are on that continent that Europe doesn't have, which is why they had to go pillage the rest of the world. I took AP British history in high school, and then I took a couple of courses in college too. And that area of Europe doesn't have the resources that Africa has. Doesn't have. They had to import a lot of the vegetables and things that are the staple in their country now. They don't have the diamonds and the gold and the fruits and any of that.
The
Any of
coffee,
that.
the cocoa, the trees, whole lot of
Yes.
stuff. Yes.
Yes. So that's why they built this. can instill and destroy other countries to bring it back to them. And one thing that I don't like either is I I've studied especially British history in depth in my in high school and college and just on my own. And these kingdoms that were built off the back of Africa and Indian and some Asian countries as well, they started out as they were dirty, they were nasty. Um, there were diseases running rampant. So I always have to bring that out because that's how the media tries to portray Africa and Africa and therefore African people. When if you go back and read about just how unhygienic a lot of these European, kings and palaces were, and then they attempted to portray Africa like that as well, the hypocrisy is just, I mean, it's just is blatant. So again, especially the British, they would not have the resources and the money and all of that if they did not have to go out and steal to get the resources that that area of Europe doesn't have.
And when I heard you say you studied British history, in high school, college, etc., it made me think about how states like Florida and Texas are trying to rewrite history now.
Yep,
With a bunch of lies, rewriting history, and we got to do a show soon on how Florida has even brought in the Prager University to teach. I mean,
it's
Prager.
horrible.
it's
Ugh. I
it
watched some of
takes
their
it takes
videos.
you.
That
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I watched some of their videos and just the lies in it and the deception that are in those videos and the way they twist history. I mean, it's disgusting. And so many kids, which are the future of this country, are going to be learning that information.
Yeah, we got to do a show on that and
Yeah,
educate folks about what really is going on in Florida. It is terrible. It is like the KKK has taken over the state and are literally rewriting history. And it's the reason why I call DeSantis the Satan. Okay, quite frankly. Um, but Africa, I believe, it seems like the people in Africa are saying, we want our stuff. We're tired of you all stealing our stuff. And guess what? They're talking to America as well. America is
yeah.
going to have to change its policies and abandon its white supremacist approach to Africa. That has been sort of the policy of the American government. Not necessarily the people, but the American government has had a sort of a white supremacist patronizing attitude toward the continent. And that's going to change because it seems like the countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in fact, let me see, let me bring up something here, where a lot of those resources are. Okay, here's a map. So if you look sort of in the middle, like top middle, Mali, Niger, Chad, the Sudan, um, though that area right there, there's a lot of revolutionary activity going on right there now. We're going to talk about it in the future, and it's also right there where there is a lot. The Congo down here, there is a lot of those natural resources that countries around the world depend upon, um, and have been stealing. So we're going to talk about all of that in future shows, okay, as we talk about Africa. But Chloe, I guess we will stop here. Um,
You want to play a little game that we didn't discuss this at all, but
okay,
in
yeah,
the
I'm down.
video that I watched, the Africans versus African Americans, they asked the African Americans how
What
many, if they could name
The
10 African countries.
Prager
Oh, no, no.
University? Oh, okay.
This is another video.
Mm-hmm.
They were talking to Africans and African Americans about various issues, and they asked the African Americans to name 10 African countries.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. You want us to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I can do that easily. Um,
Nigeria,
Nigeria, Benin,
Ghana,
Ghana, Togo. I
Egypt,
visited. I visited Togo. I visited Ghana. I visited the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast. That's about 10 there,
Ma-
isn't it?
yeah, Mali,
Mali, Chad,
Cote d'Ivoire, Chad, Guinea,
um, Guinea or Guinea,
Guinea,
depending on, Cameroon,
Rwanda,
Gabon,
South Africa,
Angola,
Tanzania,
Kenya. What?
Libya,
Ethiopia,
Somalia,
Sudan,
South Sudan,
Libya,
Morocco.
Algeria.
Ooh,
I mean, we about named a good number of them.
Togo.
I named Togo already.
Okay, yeah, we did.
Tanzania,
Yeah, we named Tanzania,
Uganda,
Uganda,
Liberia. Can't forget
Liberia. Yes.
The Central African Republic.
Congo, formerly known as Congo.
I think we said that. I mean,
We named by all of them. There's 50. Oh, we should ask our followers how many countries there are in Africa, but there's 54 guys.
yeah,
So I just wanted to play that little game. I thought it would be a good way to end the video.
yeah. Did we name Kenya?
I think we did, yeah.
Okay. Zaire?
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about Zaire.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go, guys. A little African geography lesson from the Defiant Lawyers.
Morocco.
So, yeah, I named Morocco.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, well, that is an introduction to what we're going to be talking about in coming weeks, the continent of Africa. I think the world's going to be talking about Africa because things are popping in Africa. And it's just beginning. It's been in works a long time. But I believe the African people are saying no, no, no. Let me see. I was going to see if I can go back to let me see.
Are you looking to register your business using an address other than your home? Wouldn't it be great if you could read and manage your business mail from anywhere? iPostal One.
South Africa, you are counted with me. You when I'm sit. Where were you when I'm dream? So fast, Kichi, hey boy, so fast, Kichi, hey daddy, Kichi, Kichima, Kichima, Sibram Konto, Alaye, Sibram Konto, Alaye, shoot to kill, Kilawa. Shoot to kill, Ramansa, kiss the poor, the farmer, kiss the poor, the farmer, brr, pa, pa, brr, pa, pa, attention.
All right, we're out. Peace.
That Corbin and Corbin legal team fighting for the rights of the people. That father-daughter team investing in the youth when the system ain't treating them equal. Providing truth for our people, we able to reach them. So anytime you get accused for a crime and Lord knows you ain't do it, we here to get you through it. Exemplifying prudence and glorifying God, making sure your small enough to focus on your matter throughout the neighborhoods of Dallas. Working constantly and making sure your rights are protected. A firm team of lawyers, aggressive, effective. A team that has your back in the courtroom. Two well-spoken black lawyers in the courtroom. Investing time and resources when it's evident that you were treated wrong. Now you walking out of Dallas courtroom with a settlement. Corbin and Corbett, the father-daughter legal tag team that has your back in the courtroom. Our purpose is simple. To obtain a favorable outcome for each client and glorify Christ in all we do. Our vision is to be one of the best and most